You can talk all day long about the investments inside of your investment plan, but it's also good to structure the investment plan to make sure it works for you. Hey everyone, welcome to Make Your Money Matter. Thank you so much for joining us. Today on the Make Your Money Matter show, I'm going to be discussing how much you should be contributing to your retirement plan. It's a question we get weekly here at the firm, whether it's through our radio show, through our referrals from our clients, the Make Your Money Matter podcast, and this show. And hopefully we can answer some of your questions here today. But before we do that, do us a favor and smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. Now, let's get into it. So this may seem like a simple question that is involved with conversations around whether it's a traditional IRA, a Roth, or a 401k or a Roth 401k, and which one is the right approach, and all of which that we talk about here as advisors. But the question in particular of how much you want to contribute to your retirement plan and the rule of thumb that is out there around, if you Google this or you read a white paper or you talk with someone who's in the know, they might give you some rule of thumb around 15% of your paycheck should be contributed to your retirement plan. But before we go through those topics, this question to me, in nearly 20 years of being an advisor, has a lot to do with ripple effects and these seemingly small and innocuous decisions that actually have a large impact on greater things, whether it's retirement planning or really just life in general. In Detroit, Michigan, there was a humble Sunday school teacher by the name of Edward Kimball, and he had a passion for investing in his students. All investing is still investing, and Kimball had an investment and a passion for investing in his students. And one of his students was a young boy who happened to work in his uncle's shoe shop. Now, Edward noticed that this boy wasn't really interested in Sunday school, so he took it upon himself to go meet him at his job at the shoe store. Now, that encounter changed everything for him. You see, that boy's name was Dwight L. Moody, and he went on to become one of the great evangelists and crusaders of his time. Now, years later, during one of Moody's conferences, it happened to be in Liverpool, England, there was a man in the crowd named F.B. Meyer who was transformed by Moody's message. Moody invited Meyer to tour America with him at the time, and at a conference, Meyer asked the crowd a very specific question that challenged the crowd. And in that crowd, there was a man named John Wilbur Chapman who rose to that challenge. Later, a man named Billy Sunday, a professional baseball player at the time, attended one of John Wilbur Chapman's meetings, and he became an evangelist and was transformed himself. He quit baseball and began preaching. Billy Sunday went on to be one of the great evangelist speakers and thinkers of the 20th century, and probably the most famous evangelist of his time. In 1934, a group of believers who were introduced to the church through Billy Sunday, asked evangelist Mordecai Ham to organize a gathering in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, at one of these gatherings, a man attended and gave his life to God, and that man's name was Billy Graham. Now, for those of you who may or may not be in the faith with this regard, you might still know of Billy Graham. He is a household name. If you haven't heard of him, look him up. He's an amazing man. He has reached an estimated 2 billion people. He's evangelized and shared the gospel for more than any other person. Now, going back to the beginning of this story, the humble Sunday school teacher in Detroit named Edward Kimball, that none of us had ever heard about before, he's who started this timeline of men that I mentioned here on this show. By taking an interest in a boy in his Sunday school class, by seeking him out, going to his uncle's shoe shop where he worked, and invested in him, challenging him. Remember that boy? His name was Dwight L. Moody. And the ripple effect that ensued because of the decisions of Edward Kimball had made more ripples, I think, than he can ever imagine. And he probably died never truly understanding the great impact of what he perceived most likely to be a very simple act of kindness and care. Friends, I share this story today because each and every interaction we have on a daily basis matters. Why do you think I called the show Make Your Money Matter? It doesn't have to necessarily do with money. What we do each day matters. And the decisions we make have consequences, both good and bad. and some are far beyond ourselves. We've all heard the term ripple effect, as I mentioned, and it's the continuing or the spreading of the results of an event or action that we've already done. And sometimes those events or actions at the time seem insignificant, innocuous, small. And if you're anything like me, I like to see results. Maybe not right away, but I like to see where I'm going, having a goal in mind. And something I talk about quite often here at the firm. And you might be asking, Brad, why are you starting this show with this story about this timeline of events of all these men who introduced other people to other people? Now, to answer that question, I'm bringing this up because it has a lot to do with the question we're talking about today. The question around how much I should be contributing to my retirement plan and what's the appropriate amount I should be contributing to when it comes to my retirement plan. And if we have to take a look broader than this, it's not a small question. It's actually quite a large one that can have ripple effects for a long, long time. No different than the story I just shared. So let's start with the basics. As I mentioned before, if you Google this as an example, or you looked at some white paper or anything you want to listen to right now, you'll find different discussions and points on this topic. And you're generally going to find a generalization of somewhere between 10 and 15% as the rule of thumb you should take from your income and put towards your retirement plan. Now, I want to dissect that a little bit because if you're making, let's say $100,000, 10 or 15% is $10,000 or $15,000, right? But if you're making $200,000, that same 10 or 15% is already over the maximum limit you can defer. So the current maximum retirement for 2022 for those under the age of 50 is $20,500. So right away, understanding that a rule of thumb may actually be already archaic and outdated, the percentages may not pertain to you, or you might already be capped out when it comes to your ability to contribute to retirement plan. And right there leads us into how these contributions are made. Now, when we're talking about a 10 or 15% of income going towards your retirement plan, these contributions could be made into a 401k plan or a 401k plan with a match, or maybe a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, or maybe it's even taxable accounts, meaning after-tax investments, depending on what your goals are. Now, I spoke with a early 20-year-old, a prospective client that called in from the podcast, and we were going through the discovery process, and we talked about funding for retirement. And they brought up a goal, by the way, that client ended up becoming a client of ours. And during his discovery and through our planning for him, building his black book, our wealth management design that we do for our clients, we realized that the word retirement for him wasn't necessarily 60 or 65. His words were, I want to be financially free by the age of 40. They weren't necessarily trying to say that they want to retire by 40, meaning they didn't want to work. They just wanted options other than the work they have, being financially free. So obviously we're going to go through concepts of debt. We've already talked about on this show, reduction, cash flow, managing your investments, all those managed appropriately. And with all that said, and something I say commonly here to clients, and this is an important one, is it's not always what you own, but how you own it. And what do I mean by that? You can talk all day long about the investments inside of your investment plan, but it's also good to structure the investment plan to make sure it works for you. As an example, this prospective client that we're talking about that became a client, we need to make sure that we had a healthy mix between tax deferred, otherwise known as retirement vehicles like IRAs, Roth 401ks or Roth IRAs, traditional 401ks, 403bs, TSPs, anything retirement focused, and a mix between those type of accounts and taxable accounts. Because if the goal was to be able to live off the investments in roughly 15 years for him, which would basically bring him to age 40, that'd be about 19 and a half years younger than when he could access his retirement vehicles without a penalty. Remember, 59 and a half currently stands as the age at which is early withdrawal. So when you're designing a plan and you're watching this or listening to this right now, and you're thinking about how you want to be placing your assets, understanding not always what you own, but how you own it matters. Because if you are just listening to rule of thumb and maximizing your 401k, but your goal is like my client who wanted to be financially free by 40, that might not be the best vehicle because you're going to automatically pay an early withdrawal penalty along with ordinary income to distribute those assets. So you have to understand that these assets need to go in concert with each other, tax deferred and taxable, and they need to work down the path together, working down that field as a sports analogy, getting to the goal that you have, which is living financially free when it is you want to do that. So again, not always what you own, but how you own it. You want to own something that's more of a growthy stock, for example. If that's a word, I'm going to go with it. Or, growthy stock. If you want to own more of a growthy stock or a growth stock, I would say you'd want to argue you'd rather own that in something that's tax deferred. Maybe a Roth IRA comes to mind. There's a great example recently is most people read in the past year or two of Peter Thiel's investment of owning the shares in a Roth IRA. In doing so, he effectively had tax deferred growth. And that's an amazing thing, but you have to also have your Roth IRA in concert with your traditional or tax deferred. So again, you want to make sure you go through not only what you're investing in from an investment management plan, but also how you're owning it, which leads us back in to the same conversation of how the question really of how much you should be contributing towards your retirement plan. And again, it's understanding your goals and objectives. If your goal in my example for this client is I talked to you last week who had a goal of being financially free and also being able to access the investments that he's saving and working for in the next, let's say 15 years, we need to make sure that we do that in an appropriate manner. So we're not having penalties associated with this for the distributions to pull from those kind of accounts or ordinary income. So understanding we have to have some for later, and what later means to someone may actually be different to someone else. So before we just kind of answer the question of, how much we should be contributing to a retirement plan, understanding how and what types of retirement vehicles you're using, Roth or traditional, matters. Now, steering back into the question today of how much, again, I should be contributing to my retirement plan, there are some variables to consider, as I mentioned above and recently here, when thinking about the ideal amount. First and foremost, let's talk about this. Are you married? Is your spouse, if you are married, employed? How much can you expect from both of you from Social Security benefits? And these are a few questions to bring up. And again, remember, retirement age calls for a certain amount of comfort, but it also is different for every individual. Will you spend your time gardening or traveling or starting a new business? I mean, what kind of a person are you? Or maybe it's riding a motorcycle across this great country of ours. I have a couple of clients that their goals were to see every ballpark in the United States. I have actually one client that I love talking about that started a rock and roll band when he retired in his mid 50s. I mean, the notion of it's never too late was amazing. I love sharing that story. So your goals and objectives can be whatever you want at the ages that you want. However, you want to structure it. It's important to find counsel, an advisor, to help build the plan for you. But the rule of thumb is from a lot of advisors or blogs or white papers or whatever you listen to on Investopedia maybe, you're going to find that answer to this question of how much you should be contributing to your retirement plan, you'll find the number between 10 and 15% or 10 and 20% of your salary. That's a good amount to start. Then comes to the question of what type of retirement plan. So let's look at a 401k plan, for example. Let's look at a 401k plan with a 4% match, for example. In my world, that's free money. That doesn't happen a whole lot. I'm not going to say that loud and clear. If your current employer has a 401k plan with a match, that is the ideal place to start because there really isn't much free money out there. Let's be honest. I mean, other than the past couple of years from the government, but we're going to move that aside. This is free money. That is money that's going to be contributed from your employer, incentivizing you to help your retirement. It's a great and blessed thing. So make sure you do that. That's kind of like step number one. But before you just go and crank it all the way through there, it's important to ask how much we'll want to put there and how much I want to put somewhere else. Again, back to your own specific goals and objectives is really important to put into context here. Let me throw out some stats out here for you. And this is based on Investopedia.com, the personal financial statistics and the average balance by age in a 401k plan. So for those 20-year-olds out there between the ages of 20 and 29, the average 401k balance is around $10,500. The average contribution rate, and this is why I'm bringing this up based on our question today of how much we should be contributing, the average contribution rate is around 7%. So remember, for those that are 30-year-olds between the ages of 30 and 39, the average 401k balance is $38,400. The average contribution rate for that age group is 8%. And for those 40-year-olds out there watching and listening, the age between 40 and 49, the average 401k balance is $93,400. And the contribution rate in that age range is 8%. Now I want to go a little bit further here. For the 50-year-olds, those listening and watching, between ages 50 and 59, the average 401k balance is $160,000 and the average contribution rate is 10%. Last one. for the 60-year-olds. Between 60 and 69, the 401k balance is around $182,100, and the average contribution rate is 11%. I'm gonna stop there for example. Now, one thing you'll notice in the stats I just threw out is that the contribution rate for the age ranges I gave went up. Remember, in our 20s, the average was 7% contribution, 30s was 8%, 40s stayed the same around 8%, 50s and 60s went to 10%, and then above to 11 and 12%. Now, there's a lot of things you can probably bring up here as to why, but one thing I'll mention is that typically in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we start getting higher earning power. Makes sense, right? For those watching and listening right now, that's typically when we get into the prime of our career. So we're able to defer and contribute more. That just makes logical and practical sense, right? So for those 20 and 30-year-olds out there thinking, oh my gosh, I have to max out and get to this 10 or 15% that this guy on the Make Your Money Matter show is talking about. Remember, these are averages, and it doesn't mean it's right or wrong for you. This is where you seek advice. So that's where always the show is going to go, is making sure that we talk about some of the general rules of thumb that are out there, but really bring it in and make sure you seek counsel. And it's really important to make sure that that number works for you and that you're heading towards a direction that we can actually mathematically help you not only design for the right amount of how much you should contribute, but then where we're putting it. Because again, the second question to this is where we put the retirement assets, Roth, IRA, 401k, after-tax assets. It depends on your retirement goals. So understanding the retirement savings goals, what you should aim for is kind of the big question. What should I aim for in terms of savings? You know, Fidelity in particular had some pretty concrete ideas as I was reading through there. And you know, again, it's more kind of a generalization, but it's good. They're saying by the time you're age 30, the company Fidelity calculates that you should have saved an amount equal to your annual salary. So if you're earning $50,000, let's say, by age 30, you should have around $50,000 banked for retirement. By age 40, you should have 3 times your annual salary. So by age 50, 6 times your salary. And by age 60, 8 times your salary. So, and by 67, their national retirement age, they actually brought up and said you should have 10 times. So you kind of start thinking here and going through these stats I'm reading about this and kind of going, okay, what's the overall average employee 401k contribution rate? This again, from Fidelity's findings, is 8.9%. Now I mentioned that at the top of the show, around 10 to 15%, but the average American right now is saving 8.9%. Pretty interesting if you think about it. Now, I think we should all shoot for the goal of 10 or 15. That's a good place to start. But what I want to aim for today to answer the question of how much you should be contributing to a retirement plan, here at One Capital Management on the Make Your Money Matter show, we talk about this. We like going through all of it in context because it is comprehensive. And I don't want to make it overly complicated because it is more of a contextual question and more of a contextual issue than just some simple number. It's understanding what your goals and objectives are for what type of retirement you want to have and tailoring your plan to that. And again, a retirement plan isn't just something that you just wait till your 60s to do. It can be any year or timeline that you want, but really make sure seek counsel and build that plan and then put the investment management or portfolio in line with that. And to put a bow on this conversation where I started this week's show around the ripple effects, no matter what you do, do not get paralysis by analysis is my takeaway here. Don't get stalled up and saying, well, I should be doing 10 or 15%, but I really can't. I got rent to pay. I got a mortgage to pay. I got kids to put through school. Whatever the question might be, don't get paralysis by analysis. Any dollar amount you do, even if it isn't the rule of thumb or 10 or 15%, matters. Remember the ripple effects. What you do today, it may only be $50 or $100. You start building on that. The ripple effects that you start today will matter in time. Remember that. Okay, it's time to answer your questions. If you have a question or topic that you'd like me to address here on the Make Your Money Matter show, you can leave a comment or a question in the comment section. Or again, if it's something a bit more personal, you want to go out on one-on-one, just go to the About page on this channel and send us an email. We'll always keep the questions I read here anonymous, so you never have to worry about your name being shared, but we'd love to hear from you. So the question came in today around this topic actually, but on the later end, I would say. The question came is, I just retired. What are my options to roll my balance out? Or what are my options with my balance within my 401k? Well, technically you have 3. You got 3 options, right? One is to keep it in the 401k. The other is to cash it out. And the third is to roll it over to an IRA. So let's talk about them. One, there's a lot of stats. I think there's a stat recently. I probably should find this data out a little bit more, but there's trillions of dollars sitting in old 401k plans that people don't even know about. Trillions. I mean, it's astounding how many assets are out there from people who've moved around and haven't ever rolled over their 401k to a new 401k or to an IRA. Trillions of dollars. Take a look. It's pretty fascinating. So I'm not a big believer in keeping your balance in the 401k or from a previous employer. I like the latter two. I don't like the one where it's distributions of the assets because you're going to pay high taxes. For example, let's say you have a $500,000 401k balance when you retire and your income was $100,000. You're in a certain tax bracket at that point. If you decide to cash out your 401k, not only are you going to pay early withdrawal penalties, by the way, if you're under 59 and a half, let's assume you're over 59 and a half, the early withdrawal age. Then you'll be paying ordinary income. That $500,000 you're going to bring in is going to jump you up in tax bracket quite substantially. So you always have to run the numbers with your advisor and say, is that really the best option? Of all the plans I've done in nearly 20 years, I have very rarely, I don't even think if ever, I found the cashing out option to be the best option. Usually it's allowing the rollover, which is a tax-free rollover from a 401k to your IRA. Remember, IRA stands for individual retirement account. When you are retired, meaning left your employer, you're now an individual on your own in the retirement, hopefully living the life you want to have. So I think that's one of the better options to not leave, assets out of old 401k, to roll it over to an IRA. And if it totally makes sense for you to cash it out, that's one thing. But those are your three options to answer the question. Keep it in the 401k, roll it over to an IRA, or cash it out. I added a little bit of some color context, if you will, some color commentary to that question, but that's how I would answer that question. Now, again, if you have a question or a comment you'd like me to read here, leave it in the comment section or email us in the About page on our channel. Now, before we go, if you found this show helpful or anything today we've talked about and want to learn more, you can visit our website at onecapital.com or scan the QR code on the screen with your smartphone to get you there. You can also call or text us. We want to help. Listen, there's no pressure here. We don't treat people like a number, and any good advisor shouldn't. In fact, we value relationships. It's the lifeblood of what we do. So click, call, or text us today. If you're not following us on social media, you should be. We're sharing great information on all of our social media platforms. And as I often say, if you enjoy the show, share it with someone you like. And if you don't like the show, I guess share it with someone you don't like. But until next time, always remember to make your money matter.